The Sumerians were noted for their worship of many gods. Among them was Enki, a god known for being the patron deity of the city of Eridu. Enki is depicted in many pieces of Sumerian art and literature, including the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and others. Due to his prominence in such works, it's fair to assume he played a large role in Sumerian culture. Much about Enki remains shrouded in mystery and begs further exploration. Enki, a god known for his inherent worth, represented healing, fertility, and creation in Sumerian culture. His intelligent magic often included trickery to benefit the good of the human race. Son of a sky god, Enki was thought to reign over the earth and high heavens. As a leader of the Anunnaki gods in Sumeria, it is believed that Enki inhabited the earth nearly 400,000 years ago. Enki was known by a variety of names, including Enkig, Ea, Nisiku, and Nudimund. The names come with a variety of translations such as Prince, Lord of the Earth, and Creator. Gift of fertility and creation. In Sumerian culture, Enki is heavily connected to the concepts of fertility and creation. This is often represented by water. Ancient images of Enki show rivers flowing from his masculine shoulders. The rivers depicted are thought to be the Euphrates and Tigris rivers that flow through Mesopotamia and signify his gift of fertility to the land. According to legend, the rivers were formed from his semen, which further supports his ties to the concept of fertility. In addition, other symbols associated with Enki are the goat and the fish, which also signify fertility or fertileness. One Sumerian lore depicts Enki as the founder of Eridu, possibly Mesopotamia's first city, thus establishing the beginning of life on Earth. The spiritual site of Eridu has been compared to the Judeo-Christian concept of the Garden of Eden. The intelligent, yet mischievous Enki suggested the gods create other beings to mine the gold for them. The Anunnaki were thought to be clone masters who sought to clone lesser beings, such as the human race, to do their work. Control of human beings is still thought to be happening under Anunnaki gods today. Although Enki contributed to the concept of cloning, which could be considered manipulation of the human race, he was well-intended and provided humans with information on how to restore balance to the earth after devastating droughts and famine. Enki had a substantial cosmic family line. His immediate family included a father figure, mother, brother, wife, and 4 sons. An additional 8 children were born later, as mentioned in a folktale. The names and relations of Enki's family members vary throughout ancient texts. Enki was a very powerful god and had the assistance of mythical beings at his service. Legends describe an assortment of creatures such as mermaids, giants, and even demons that aided Enki in his earthly endeavors. Also, he could call upon both destructive and caring existences. Enki favored humanity and social justice. He was known for his intelligence, wisdom, and gift for divine arts and crafts. Enki's knowledge of rituals included exorcism, as well as healing prayers and chants. An important figure in mythological history, Enki remains one of the greatest Sumerian legends and one of the most complex Sumerian gods. As such, one can spend a significant amount of time delving into the history and mystery of Enki. Continue to explore this fascinating mythical being on your own and enjoy the journey. A discovery comes along that challenges those theories. We can thank the late, great journalist George Plimpton for one artifact that has recently challenged that narrative, potentially setting back the history of mathematics and casting a new light on the ever-intriguing culture of the ancient Babylonians. The artifact, known as Plimpton 322, is a cuneiform tablet that was purchased almost a century ago from the real-life Indiana Jones, and could potentially prove that the ancient Babylonians were the first civilization to understand trigonometry. Cuneiform tablets. Pythagoras is thought to have been the first to understand that the area of the square of the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle is equal to the sum of the areas of the squares of its other two sides, aka the Pythagorean theorem. But it's not necessarily well documented that Pythagoras actually conceptualized this equation, nor are there any other of his mathematical achievements. Pythagoras ran a school that was shrouded in mystery and secrecy, with a Kabbalistic take on math and numbers. Some believe it is possible that his students may have been responsible for his supposed achievements in mathematics, but, due to either reverence or fear, gave credit to Pythagoras. Interpretations and documentation from the time are scarce, as knowledge was typically spread by word of mouth. At the same time, Pythagoras' school was almost cult-like, with stories of members being murdered for not maintaining the school's secrecy and learnings. The ancient Babylonians, on the other hand, used cuneiform tablets to record much of their intellectual work, with thousands of tablets having been recovered to this day. Many of them were excavated in the early 1900s and sold to museums or collectors, but some of the implications of their carvings are challenging what archaeologists have believed about ancient history. One of these tablets was purchased by George Plimpton for a mere $10 in 1922 and has been the center of a heated debate between archaeologists. The new theory pairs the findings from Plimpton 322 with another tablet known as YBC 7289 and posits that Babylonian mathematics included trigonometry, predating the Greeks by 1,000 years. These ancient Babylonians used a base 60 system of mathematics rather than the base 10 system that we use today. While we have all assumed Pythagoras to be the first to postulate his eponymous theory, Hipparchus is generally known to be the Greek father of trigonometry and the first to produce a trigonometric table, known as the Table of Chords. Hipparchus's work required a knowledge of trigonometry for measuring astronomical distances, but much of the basis for his work came from Babylonian mathematics using the base 60 system. Also, few details are known specifically about his life, despite being credited with the discovery of a large field of mathematics. The base 60 system allowed the Babylonians to make trigonometric calculations in terms of ratios rather than angles. What is so fascinating about this discovery is that it brings a subjective interpretation to mathematics, which may seem counterintuitive, but the ancient Babylonian system of trigonometry shows that they were capable of achieving similar results using a different mathematical perspective. Part of their base 60, or sexagesimal system, is even retained today in certain elements of our lives. Long before the sprawling city streets of Mexico City stood another city, one almost lost in the mists of time, if not for the efforts of some amazing archaeologists and a little luck. Under the streets of this Latin American city is another city that was once called Tenochtitlan. Found underneath the now historical sector of modern Mexico City, although its initial construction would look nothing like what we see today, instead, the present Mexico City has been built on a dry lake bed, previously known as Lake Texcoco, and the former Tenochtitlan had its foundations built on an island by the once great Aztec Empire. The great city was expanded and added to over the centuries until its ultimate fall at the hands of the invading Spanish in the 15th century. Before its downfall, it was a true marvel to behold and was one of the largest cities in the pre-Columbian Americas. Bernal Diaz de Castillo, in his conquest of New Spain, offers us some insights into the surprise of the conquerors as they approached the city. When we saw so many cities and villages built in the water and other great towns on dry land, we were amazed and said that it was like the enchantments on account of the great towers and quays and buildings rising from the water, and all built of masonry. And some of our soldiers even asked whether the things that we saw were not a dream. I do not know how to describe it, seeing things as we did that had never been heard or seen of before, not even dreamed about. The great city was founded in 1325 AD, and like most of the civilizations around the world, great cultures need a secure cornerstone of religious underpinnings to bring order and control to the masses. The Mexica was founded in the city and ruled over the Aztec Empire. However, there are suggestions that they were a harsh civilization and plenty of evidence that shows they possessed a cruel streak. The religion was based on an ancient prophecy that recognized the early tribal cultures of Central America and noted that they would find peace in a great city whose site would be signaled to them in the form of a great eagle that held a snake in its mouth, resting on top of a cactus. Interestingly, the Mexica concluded that the answer to this prophecy was found on an island in Lake Texcoco, fulfilling their belief and creating a foundation to build the great city and open it to not only their people, but also to their gods. During excavations of Tenochtitlan in 2006, archaeologists uncovered a massive stone tablet dedicated to one of their gods called Tlaticotri. They're calling it the largest Aztec idol ever found, and it seems a title well-deserved, weighing at 12.5 tons. A spectacular statue of that size with almost perfect detail should be fascinating enough, but it seems it's even more intriguing because some were speculating this structure may have been a door to a hidden chamber. The monolith of Tlaticotri was excavated within close proximity to the Templo Mayor, which was actually discovered by accident as workers uncovered a corner of the great monolith while sweeping some of the temple steps. Templo Mayor was the main temple and was used by the Aztecs for ceremonial purposes. Unfortunately, this was primarily human sacrifice. Archaeologists have reported that in one ceremony alone, thousands of victims were sacrificed in 1487. Tlaticotri, the earth god-goddess, was a Mesoamerican earth goddess associated with fertility. As she was seen as their source of life, the Aztecs saw it necessary to constantly please their goddess with blood sacrifices, especially human hearts. According to the creation legend surrounding it, the earth first roamed on the primordial sea in the form of a monster by this name. The legend also goes on to say that this goddess was fierce and had a taste for human flesh so ferocious that one single gaping mouth with teeth of flint knives was not enough to satisfy her bestial hunger. To remedy this, she had more mouths at her elbows and knees that could simultaneously devour her victims. She was so savage that even other gods were afraid of her. The myth continues to say that the gods Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl transformed into giant serpents and strangled Tlaticotri until her giant body split in two. They threw one half of her broken body up in the sky, and it was transformed into the vault of the heavens, and the other half of her created the earth. The other deities were appalled by what the serpents had done to Tlaticotri, so they descended to the earth half to console her. They commanded that all the fruits necessary for the survival of humans should come from her. From that moment, all creation was to come from her body. They made it so that all trees, flowers, and herbs would spring from her hair, wells and springs to come from her eyes, her mouth would create the rivers, lakes, and caverns, and her nose would create the mountain ranges and valleys. The goddess sprang back to life in a new way, but despite the gifts she had been given, she is said to still cry out at night with her longing to continue to eat the hearts of humankind. The legend continues the goddess was restless and would not stay quiet and still until she was given the sacrifices, nor would she bear fruit on the land unless her thirst was quenched with the blood of men. Some researchers believe that the increase in human sacrifice in the later stages of the Mayan civilization and the almost frenzied pace it took with the Aztecs was due to the decline of their society. This downward spiral would have made it very easy for the Spanish to conquer them. Unfortunately, when the massive statue of Tlaticotri was discovered, it was fragmented into 4 pieces, with a section of its core missing or possibly destroyed by the decimation of time. However, despite its incomplete appearance, the monolith of this earth monster deity is one that radiates great power and intimidation to all those in its presence. The Aztecs believed that the presentation of a monument should be in accordance with its cosmological place, and as Tlaticotri was depicted as an earth monster, she was placed in the earth underneath or below other objects. She was also often carved beneath Aztec monuments rather than in plain sight, like those of the carvings at Tlaloc, and it's believed that this is so that she can take her position off the earth as well as resting against the earth itself. She is also placed front forward in the many representations found of her. In the Aztec culture, it was commonplace for their deities to be presented this way as to show their power and distinguish them from other figures. Directly underneath the statue, they discovered the largest find of offerings, which included shells and corals, a tiny pine mask, a sawfish bill, 8,500 animal bones, a jar of grain, a scepter, and many fire god sculptures. Archaeologists believe these to be an arrangement of sacrificial ornaments or offerings to the goddess. The gods of old and their worship has always fascinated us. Even in modern religion, we venerate statues of saints in buildings and churches that are adorned with symbolism and carvings that are linked to old pagan worship. But sadly, even with the many lives that the Aztecs sacrificed to Teotihuacán to placate her thirst for human hearts, the once great city of Tenochtitlan was abandoned by their goddess. Following a failed aqueduct designed to bring fresh water to the Aztec people, a massive flood destroyed the city in 1502 AD, including many satellite towns and villages. Even though the city was built by mortar, the walls could not sustain the devastating attack by the water. However, the Mexica were persistent and began rebuilding once the waters receded. For the most part, the technological genius of the Aztec people allowed them to build dams which actually control the level of water quite well. However, after the Spanish conquest, the dams were destroyed and the flooding once again claimed this great city of ancient times. A strange circular rock known as Alien Mountain in Sri Lanka is so called because of its cylindrical shape. Numerous UFO sightings, ancient legends, and spiritual connotations. Now, newly discovered petroglyphs, which some believe to be an antique astronomical code, have been discovered at the site as well. Some researchers believe that the mountain and its ancient rock carvings provide proof of extraterrestrial visitors on Earth. Sri Lanka is a large independent island nation in the Indian Ocean, located about 26 miles off the southeast coast of India. The island was colonized by anatomically modern humans in the last interglacial period, dating back to around 125,000 years ago. Danigala Mountain is situated in the Palawanwana district of Sri Lanka and has long been known as a sacred site to the local population. The mountain itself is a unique cylindrical-shaped rock which is known by various intriguing names including Alien Mountain, Kandagama Rock, and the Stargate of King Ravana. It's believed to be one of the places where King Ravana landed his special aircraft, Dandu Monara. According to Hindu legend, King Ravana was one of the most powerful beings ever to roam the universe. He ruled in Sri Lanka over the Manera gods, humans, and demons. Legend says that Ravana ruled Lanka for several hundred years prior to the times of Ramayana, when he was killed by Prince Yama for kidnapping his wife Sita. Some researchers believe that this Ramayana was not entirely fictional character and may have been based on a real king who ruled over Sri Lanka from 2554 to 2517 BC. Under the rule of the scholarly Ravana, Sri Lanka witnessed great advancements in science and medicine. The Pushpaka Vimana, or the aeroplane, in which some versions of the legend is said to have flown during his reign, is held up as an example of the great scientific achievements taking place at the time. The word Vimana is composed of V, the sky, and Mana, meaning measure. Vimana is something that measures the sky as it crosses it. Indian legends are full of stories of Vimana. The most well-known of these legends of the Pushpaka Vimana concerns Rama, who was returning from Lanka to Ayodhya along with Sita after defeating Ravana. The Vimana that was used by Ravana himself was also known as Dandu Monara. In the local Sinhalese language, Monara means peacock and Dandu Monara means that which can fly resembling a peacock. In fact, the story of Ravana flying in a Vimana with his wife Mandodari is depicted in the insignia of Sri Lanka's most famous hotel, Galleyface Hotel, Colombo. In some ancient texts which discuss these flying machines, there are tantalizing mentions of possible fuels used, aeronautics, metallurgy, and aerial maneuvers that were deployed in flying them. Some researchers have noted the connection between these ancient Vimana and the designation of Alien Mountain to describe Danigala Mountain. There's just one problem. There is no record of any UFO sightings in the area of the mountain. It could be, perhaps, the designation Alien Mountain comes from the connection with the ancient Vimanas. Though no one seems to be sure of that, it's possible through the alien connection that it goes further back than modern UFO sightings. In September 2020, a doctor published a controversial report on the ResearchGate scientific networking site on the petroglyphs at Alien Mountain entitled Danigala Coding Sri Lanka. In this report, which describes the new discovery of petroglyphs in a part of the northwest slope of the mountain in July 2020, Danigala states, "Those bind runes are dominantly compared with other archaeological sites in Sri Lanka and the Southeast Asia region. The type of symbols, bind runes and petroglyphs found are quite new and for the first time discovered in Sri Lankan during Archaeo-Astronomical and Geological Preliminary Survey conducted by the Central Culture Fund, with the cooperation of South Asian Astrobiology and Earth Sciences Research Unit of Eco-Astronomy Sri Lanka. Hence, this is a new discovery, and it should be considered as our geological, astronomical, and archaeological heritage site, which represents the collective memory of the anthropomorphic scenes affected by Mother Nature." He's the CEO and founder of Eco-Astronomy Sri Lanka, established in 2016 as a newly developed research area in Sri Lanka. Their research focuses on comparative systematic analysis of extreme environmental conditions of planet Earth which related to extraterrestrial life based on paleontological and petrological factors. He believes that the rock carvings found at Alien Mountain, so-called bind runes, when two or more runes are connected or bound together, constitute a lost astronomical counting system created by the Neolithic hunters thousands of years ago. Though such bind ruins are unique, ancient rock art in Sri Lanka is fairly common. It first came to the attention of researchers in 1897, and to date, over 40 sites have been catalogued on the island. These sites, mostly rock shelters, are mainly concentrated in the eastern, southeastern, north-central, and central hill regions of the island. The paintings in the caves generally depict humans and animals, such as elephants, leopards, stags, deer, and dogs. It's important to note that the animals depicted are not shown in hunting scenes. When they're shown alongside humans, they appear almost as companions rather than prey. Some researchers have pointed out the similarities between the circular Danigala Mountain and the prominent ancient rock fortress in the northern Matali district near the town of Dambulla in the central province of Sri Lanka. This enigmatic rock outcrop rises dramatically from the plains. Its almost vertical walls soar skyward to a flat-topped summit that contains the ruins of an ancient civilization, believed to be once the focal point of the short-lived kingdom of Kassapa. Given its stunning appearance, it's perhaps not surprising that Sigiriya is known by locals as the eighth wonder of the world. The fortress complex is located on a massive rock plateau 1,214 feet above sea level. The fortress complex includes the remains of a ruined palace surrounded by an extensive network of fortifications, huge gardens, ponds, canals, alleys, and fountains. From the 3rd century BC, the rocky plateau of Sigiriya functioned as a monastery. In the second half of the 5th century AD, King Kasyapa constructed a royal residence there, but after his death, the site again became a Buddhist monastery which lasted up until the 14th century, when it was finally abandoned. The western wall of the palace was almost entirely covered by stunning frescoes created during the reign of Kasyapa, 18 of which survive to this day. The frescoes depict naked females and are considered to be either portraits of Kasyapa's wives and concubines or priestess performing religious rituals. Another striking feature of Sigiriya is its mirror wall. In ancient times, it was polished so thoroughly that the king could see his reflection in it. The mirror wall is painted with inscriptions and poems written by the visitors to the area, the most ancient of which dates back to the 8th century, showing that Sigiriya was a tourist destination more than 1,000 years ago. Sigiriya has also water gardens, cave and boulder gardens, and also terrace gardens. They are located on the western part of the site and were watered using an incredibly complex hydraulic system, which consisted of canals, locks, lakes, dams, bridges, fountains, as well as surface and underground water pumps. The buildings and landscape gardens of Sigiriya show that the creators of this incredible architectural monument used unique and creative technical skills and technologies. In fact, so astonishing are the features that some paranormal researchers believe the site to be the result of extraterrestrial intervention rather than human ingenuity and hard work. These researchers point out the architectural and engineering design at the site, which is advanced even by 21st century standards. One legend surrounding the huge rock fortress states that it was built initially for Kuwera, the treasurer of the gods of Vishwakarma, the divine engineer. One alien hunter suggested that the rock fortress was something like a lighthouse for ancient aliens in their vimanas, reasoning that if they were landing at night, the crystals in the mirror wall of the site would reflect the light back from the craft. Believers in the ancient alien theory for the site question how ancient builders created such extraordinary structures on top of a rock over 1,200 feet high. But why would this suggest aliens? There are numerous archaeological sites throughout the world far higher up and more inaccessible, the most obvious examples being the Inca citadel of Machu Picchu in Peru, located 7,970 feet up on a mountain ridge. The palace and fortress complex of Sigiriya has been recognized as one of the finest examples of ancient urban planning in the world. Taking into account the uniqueness of this site, UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site in 1982. The Inga Stone is located in the middle of the waters of the Inga River, near the small city of Inga in Paraíba State, in the northwest of Brazil. This controversial historical treasure, 150 feet long and 13 feet in height, is covered in carvings of strange, unidentified geometric symbols of various sizes and shapes. Although many researchers have speculated on the origins and the meaning of the symbols, no theory has yet been proven. Were they made by a previously unknown civilization, maybe processing ancient technology long since forgotten? What do the symbols really mean? The area where the site is located covers around 40 hectares of extensive granite outcrops that contain a large number of rock carvings. The main outcrop is popularly known as Pedra do Inga, the Stone of Inga, and forms a wall oriented northeast-southeast, and features the three main rock art panels at the site. In the rainy season, this large monolith is partially covered by water and can only be seen in its entirety in dry weather and when the riverbed is completely dry. Although there is speculation as to what tools could have been used to make the carvings, it's believed that the figures were made with round stones found in nearby streams. Archaeological research indicates the existence of lithic workshops in the vicinity of the site and temporary camps associated with the main site in use from about 10,000 BC to around 1400 AD, possibly as a sacred place used by the local prehistoric populations. There is also evidence of other occupations in the areas outside of the main site which is associated with it. So far, experts have identified more than 400 engravings on the stone's surface. Most of the Inga's carvings are hard to understand, but some of them are thought to represent celestial features, with two being similar to the Milky Way and the constellation of Orion. Others are thought to be representations of circles, geometric shapes, animals, fruits, weapons, human shapes, and birds. Many of the carvings seem to relate to the daily life of the local population at the time. The exact origin of the inscriptions is still unknown. Brazil was officially discovered in 1500 when a fleet on its way to India, commanded by Portuguese diplomat Pedro Álvares Cabral, landed in Porto Seguro between Salvador and Rio de Janeiro. The first references to the mysterious carvings are found in the reports of the European settlers in the state in the 16th century. Among these references, the most important is the Dialogues of Brazil's Grandness, attributed to Ambrosio Fernandes Brandão, written between 1590 and 1618. According to the researcher Gabriela Martin in 2008, the Inga stone is undoubtedly the most famous rock engraving in Brazil. But as a result of this exalted reputation, a number of groundless theories, hopeful speculations, and popular myths have grown up around the stone and the origin and meaning of its carvings. Hidden treasures are mentioned, as are lost Phoenician sailors, and of course, extraterrestrial beings. Where would we be without their help? Gabriel D'Annunzio Baraldi, from 1938 to 2002, was Italian by birth but lived in Brazil's São Paulo until his death. Baraldi claimed that the area around the Inga stone was a Hittite colony and that the Hittite Empire had existed in Brazil. This was apparently based on the basic similarity and nothing more between Hittite inscriptions and those on the Inga stone. The Hittites occupied the ancient region of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, around 1700 BC. So how they found the way to Brazil is anyone's guess. Perhaps the extraterrestrials brought them. In the early 20th century, the Austrian traveller Ludwig Schwenhagen toured various parts of northeastern Brazil, studying traces of what he believed to be the presence of Phoenicians in this region. Besides numerous articles, he published a book, Ancient History of Brazil, associating the inscriptions of Inga with the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were a maritime people who occupied the coast of Levant, modern Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and most of western Turkey from around 1500 to 332 BC. Again, what were they doing in Brazil? But the theory of Phoenicians in Brazil and the Americas has a long history, as part of the recurring, often bizarre attempts to find ancient Semitic inscriptions in the Western Hemisphere. In 1872, a stone inscribed with Phoenician writing was allegedly discovered in Paraíba, northeast Brazil. The letter sent from the original discoverer of the stone to the president of the Brazilian Historical and Geographic Institute is worth quoting. As I was having stones carried into my property, my slaves brought me one that they had already broken into 4 pieces. This stone presented numerous characters that no one understood. I had them copied by my son, who knows a little about draftsmanship, and I was resolved to send this copy to Your Excellency as President of the Historical and Geographical Institute of Brazil to see if Your Excellency or some other person could determine what these letters mean. And as I have arrived in this capital city and have not had the time to give them personally to Your Excellency, I have sent them to him through the post. I am with all consideration and respect for Your Excellency, attentive, devoted and obliged servant, Joachim Alves da Costa, Rio, 11th of September, 1872. The inscription itself told the story of a Phoenician ship which was caught in a storm and separated from a fleet sailing from Egypt around Africa. The stone also mentions the pharaoh Necho I or Necho II. A transcription was shown to the director of the National Museum of Brazil, who at first accepted the inscription as genuine. But Alves da Costa and his estate proved impossible to locate, and it was concluded that the whole affair was nothing more than a hoax. Marshall McCusick has reviewed and dismissed various theories of Phoenicians or Canaanites in the New World, observing that in this modern day, everyone wishes to be his own authority, and the personal search for cultural alternatives seems to make every idea or theory equal in value. Ronald H. Fritz has discussed the theory of such claims from the 17th to the 20th centuries, concluding that although the journey to Brazil was technically possible, no archaeological evidence has yet been discovered to prove it. Peruvian electrical engineer Huari Roman has linked the Inga Stone with refugees from the sunken continent of Atlantis. Roman claims that before the Great Flood, most of central Brazil was a huge inland sea, and that the Atlanteans and Arawaks lived around this lake, and that the one artifact left behind by them was the Inga Stone. After the deluge, a cataclysm inundated Atlantis and Brazil, destroying the inland sea. Some groups fled to the Andean highlands of Peru, eventually developing the empire of Tiwanaku, which then later became the Incan Empire. What is Roman's evidence for this extraordinary theory? Apparently, he's keeping that to himself. There are also those who believe that the signs on the Inga Stone are the work of extraterrestrials. According to Claudio Quintans of the Parabano Center for Ufology, it is unlikely that the prehistoric people of the area would have been able to make such intricate carvings. Therefore, he believes the carvings were actually made by extraterrestrial visitors to the planet, and some symbols may be interpreted as explaining the distance between the planets such as the Earth and the Moon, and even further beyond that. He adds that the Inga Stone shows some formulas for the production of quantum energy. There must be a queue of physicists forming around Quintian's house to ask just where he obtained that earth-shattering information and what it means. The attitude of Quintans is very common in alternative history theories. The belief is that there's no way that the natives of Brazil could have ever been advanced enough to make anything that required any technological skill or knowledge. In fact, in Brazil's Natural History Museum, there are stone instruments which the natives use for various activities, including grooving stones to make inscriptions such as those on the Inga Stone. Spanish engineer Francisco Pavia Alemany has mathematically studied the stone, and his first results were published in 1986. Alemany identified a series of bowls on the stone's surface and another petroglyph etched into the vertical surface of the wall of Inga that formed a solar calendar. Alemany later focused on recording and documenting a series of symbols on the surface which represented stars that appeared to have been grouped together in what appeared to be constellations. According to him, it's the coexistence of the bowls and constellations on the rock's surface which give the stone its archaeo-astronomical significance. Although there are a number of theories to explain the unusual designs on the stone, the simplest is probably true. The symbols represent various cultural and spiritual teachings passed on by local tribal elders to the younger generations. Unfortunately, there have been virtually no studies of the technological development, social structure, or cultural complexity of the prehistoric populations of northeastern Brazil. Hence, there's a gap in our knowledge of the cultures of the area, which allows all sorts of bizarre, unsubstantiated theories to wriggle through unchecked. The Inga Stone and the area around it represents a people who created expressive art in rock with a high technical capacity. The site is remarkable for its almost exclusive use of non-figurative representations on its panels, expressing the creative genius of a human group that appropriated abstract aesthetic standards as a means of expression of possibly symbolic religious concepts. The local populations were unlike other prehistoric Brazilian cultures in this, who mostly made use of anthropomorphic and zoomorphic representations. Unfortunately today, the site where the Inga Stone stands is under constant threat, not only from the elements, but from the hundreds of tourists who trample all over it almost daily. There have been also cases of the stone being damaged by vandals. So there is an urgent need for the Inga Stone to be protected and preserved if we want future generations to be as fascinated by it as we are. Controversy has arisen around an artifact known as the Nazareth inscription, long believed to be an official Roman response to the disappearance of Jesus' body from its tomb. New research has cast doubt on the origin of the inscription, which was acquired by a German collector in Paris in 1878. However, apart from a note indicating that it had come from Nazareth, its history has remained something of a mystery. The Nazareth inscription. The Nazareth inscription itself is written on a block of marble about 2 feet tall, a foot wide, and 2 inches deep. The first of its 22 lines of text, carved in Greek letters, announces an edict of Caesar. The edict calls for capital punishment for anyone who removes a body from a tomb. If the tablet did originate in Nazareth, it's understandable how one could make a connection between this edict and the beginnings of Christianity. Perhaps the inscription had something to do with the controversy over the famous empty tomb and suggests that a Roman emperor was aware of disturbing claims about a crucified man rising from the dead in a distant province of his wide empire. The style of the letters used in the inscription certainly indicate it was written in the first half of the 1st century. Indeed, no one has ever questioned the authenticity of the Nazareth inscription, so it's highly unlikely that this is a forgery. But its interpretation and possible connection to the story of the resurrection of Christ are still fiercely debated today. The translation of the inscription reads, "Edict of Caesar. It is my decision, graves and tombs, whoever has made them for the religious observances of parents or children or household members, that these remain undisturbed forever. But if anyone legally charges that another person has destroyed or has in any manner extracted those who have been buried, or has moved with wicked intent those who have been buried to other places, committing a crime against them, or has moved sepulchre-sealing stones against such a person, I order that a judicial tribunal be created, just as concerning the gods in human religious observances. Even more so, it will be obligatory to treat with honor those who have been entombed. You are absolutely not to allow anyone to move, but if so, I wish that one to suffer capital punishment under the title of tomb breaker." The discovery of the Nazareth inscription. When scholar and collector of antiquities Wilhelm Freuner died in his Paris home in 1925, he left behind among his possessions a curious inscription and manuscripts that could be the oldest surviving artifact of Christianity. By the time he died, he'd been in possession of the Nazareth inscription for nearly 50 years. His inventory of the inscription simply states, "This marble was sent from Nazareth in 1878. In 1925, the collection was acquired by the Parish National Library, where the Nazareth inscription was rediscovered and read by a Monsieur Rostovdev. Rostovdev informed his friend, the scholar Franz Cumont, about the inscription, and in 1930 he published a Greek transcription and a translation of the inscription with a commentary. Cumont came to the conclusion that there were two possible contexts for the inscription, which have remained the leading contenders to this day. Theories about the inscription's origin. The first suggests that the edict was issued against the background of the general upheavals of Rome's violent transition from republic to empire. The end of the republic had witnessed the eastern provinces extensively plundered. Tombs and temples alike were ravaged. Perhaps the Nazareth inscription was part of a general effort to restore order. If this is the case, then the inscription would belong to the final decades BC, and thus originally to a fully Roman dominion, somewhere like Greece or more likely Asia Minor, before eventually surfacing in Palestine. Palestinian origins. The primary alternative explanation is that the edict is a response to the Christian gospel and the hostile conflicts it aroused. In the Bible, the disciples of Jesus claim that they found their master's tomb empty, and the Gospel of Matthew makes it clear that opposing accounts of the empty tomb were being circulated. Those Jews who did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah spread the rumor that the disciples had stolen the body, and according to Matthew, they bribed the Roman guards into swearing this alternative truth before the governor. Could it be that, aware of enduring tensions and conflict over the claims of the resurrection, the emperor issued an edict specifying harsh penalties for violating tombs and the bodies lying within? But while this, of course, doesn't prove that the inscription is evidence for the resurrection of Christ, it does indicate that the story of the resurrection of Christ was already circulating very early on, perhaps even in the reign of Emperor Claudius around 41 AD. If the story of the resurrection of Christ was widely known soon after his crucifixion, it could be that it was circulated by his apostles themselves. In his 1968 book, author Michael Green wrote that there was firm contemporary evidence for the presence of Jesus' empty tomb. He said this piece of evidence is called the Nazareth inscription, after the town where it was found. It is an imperial edict belonging either to the reign of Tiberius, AD 1437, or of Claudius, AD 4154. And it's an invective backed with heavy sanctions against meddling around with tombs and graves. It looked very much as if the news of the empty tomb had got back to Rome in a garbled form. Pilate would have had this report, and he would obviously have had said that the tomb had been rifled. This edict, it seems, is the imperial reaction. But as mentioned earlier, the inscription provides no evidence for any specific event. Indeed, skeptics of the Jesus connection argue that there is absolutely nothing linking this inscription with Christianity, only the town it was found in, even though Jesus was not buried in Nazareth and its possible date. They also point out that the law is prefaced by a reference to the importance of family burial cult. So, the incentive for the law seems to have been an objection to those who were depriving people of the right to pay homage to their dead ancestors, something that would appear to have no connection with the missing body of Jesus. Skeptics also point out that in the late 19th century, there were only two major market centers for all antiquities recovered in Palestine: Jerusalem and Nazareth. Thus, Zulueta makes the plausible conjecture that the slab was recovered either in Samaria or Decapolis, and either purchased or shipped in out of the nearest possible place, which would have been Nazareth. New evidence. In April 2020, it was announced that the scientists had conducted the first isotope analysis of marble sample from the slab containing the inscription. The research team sensationally discovered that the unique isotopic fingerprints of the marble were a close match for a signature found in white marble from the Greek island of Kos, off Turkey's southwestern coast. As Kos is a long way from Nazareth, the results of the tests would certainly seem to reduce the likelihood that the edict had any connection with early Christianity. Researchers believe that the inscription, rather than referring to the story of Jesus' empty tomb, it relates to an incident which took place decades before the death of Jesus. The incident took place on Kos in the 30s BC and involved what happened after the death of an extremely unpopular but powerful official named Nicias. After Nicias' demise, locals broke into his tomb and desecrated the body. Researchers now believe that the Roman edict warning of harsh punishments for grave desecration was a response to the fate suffered by the body of Nicias. Lead study author Kyle Harper, a professor of classics and letters at the University of Oklahoma, said of the discovery, "We believe that it's the first time stable isotope chemistry has ever been used to establish the provenance of an inscription, period. We got lucky twice over. First, it was a very direct match with a rather unexpected marble quarry, so we could really pinpoint its origins on Kos. Second, it happened that we know of an episode of tomb violation that was very famous in the exact right period. I would have never hoped for such a remarkable alignment." Harper and his team have also suggested the Greek dialect on the inscription does not match a Nazarene background for the period, and that it could have been written anywhere between 100 BC and 100 AD. But although Harper's work proves that the marble was sourced from Kos, it doesn't prove that Nazareth's inscription was inscribed in Kos. Indeed, since its publication, Harper's research has been questioned by other researchers and is certainly not set to be the final word on the edict. One researcher has pointed out that with the Herodian dynasty, which ruled Judea for almost 80 years, from 37 BC to 39 AD, traded regularly with the island of Kos. Perhaps they reason marble was commercially transported to Judea from Kos and found its way into Nazareth during the reign of Claudius or Nero. At the moment, there's no way of knowing for certain where the stone was inscribed and what exactly it was referring to. It seems the debate about the Nazareth inscription is set to rage on for many years to come. Evidence from the 11,000-year-old carvings on an ancient temple site in what is now Turkey suggests that a mass of comet fragments hit the Earth around 11,000 BC. There is also other evidence to support this catastrophic event from a Greenland ice core. The impact, which probably resulted from the breakup of a giant comet in the inner solar system, triggered a cold climate which lasted at least 1,000 years and seems to have been remembered by the hunter-gatherers in the area for thousands of years afterwards. Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe, Turkish for the Hill of the Navel, is a 1,000-foot diameter mound located at the highest point of a mountain ridge in southeastern Turkey. The site includes 2 phases of use, believed to be social or ritual in nature, by its discoverer and excavator Klaus Schmidt. It dates back to the 8th millennium BC, and since 1994, excavations conducted by Klaus Schmidt of the Istanbul branch of the German Archaeological Institute have been taking place at the site. Results to date have been outstanding, especially bearing in mind that the excavators estimate that their work has uncovered a mere 5% of the site. Göbekli Tepe consists of 4 arrangements of monolithic pillars linked together by segments of coarsely built dry stone walls to form a series of circular or oval structures. There are 2 large pillars in the center of each complex, which are enriched by slightly smaller stones facing inwards. During the first phase of the site, circles of huge T-shaped stone pillars were erected, at the moment the world's oldest known megaliths. Archaeologists believe that these pillars could have once supported roofs. The structures vary in size between 33 and 98 feet in diameter and have floors made of burned lime. The megaliths themselves, 43 of which have been unearthed so far, are mainly T-shaped pillars of soft limestone up to around 16 feet in height. The stone would have been excavated and transported from a stone quarry on the lowest southwestern slope of the hill. Geophysical surveys on the hill indicate there are as many as 250 more megaliths lying buried around the site, suggesting that another 16 complexes once existed at Göbekli Tepe. Although the pictograms at Göbekli Tepe do not represent a form of writing, they may have functioned as sacred symbols whose meanings were implicitly understood by the local population at the time. The carving of the comet impact. The mysterious megaliths at Göbekli Tepe have been puzzling archaeologists and challenging presumptions about prehistoric culture since their discovery. The most debated point is how a nomadic hunter-gatherer society with a supposedly primitive social structure could plan and build such monumental stone circles. It was recently announced that researchers from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland had found evidence for the recording of a devastating comet impact more than 13,000 years ago while examining symbols on a decorated stone from Göbekli Tepe called the Vulture Stone. Using computer star tracking software called Stellarium, the researchers were able to track what the sky looked like in the time Göbekli Tepe was in use. The team matched carvings of animals on the Vulture Stone, which they interpreted as astronomical symbols, to patterns of stars and were able to pinpoint the cataclysmic event caused by the comet fragments hitting the Earth to 10,950 BC, give or take 250 years. Another image on the stone, that of a headless man, is believed to symbolize human disaster and extensive loss of life. Scientists have speculated for decades whether a comet could have been the cause of a sudden fall in temperature during a period known as the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas was essentially a mini ice age which lasted around 1,000 years, and it's considered a critical period for humanity as it was around the time agriculture and the first Neolithic civilizations arose, possibly in response to the arrival of a colder climate. Dr. Martin Sweatman of the School of Engineering at the University of Edinburgh led the research into the Vulture Stone and commented on the team's findings. I think this research, along with the recent finding of a widespread platinum anomaly across the North American continent, virtually seal the case in favor of a Younger Dryas comet impact. Our work serves to reinforce that physical evidence. What is happening here is the process of paradigm change. It appears Göbekli Tepe was, among other things, an observatory for monitoring the night sky. One of its pillars seems to have served as a memorial to this devastating event, probably the worst day in history since the end of the Ice Age. The vulture stone, labelled by archaeologists Pillar 43, is one of the oldest artifacts discovered at Göbekli Tepe, and archaeologists have found that it exhibits signs of being cared for by the people there for millennia, which indicates that what was carved onto it was very important. Perhaps the event that researchers believe the images on the stone depicted had a long-lasting impact on the civilization in the area. In that paper published on the vulture stone, Images in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry in 2017, Dr. Sweatman and Dimitrios Tigritsis described their findings connecting the comet strike with Göbekli Tepe and the onset of the Younger Dryas in more detail. They said, "Symbolism on Pillar 18 is consistent with an event of cosmic origin. The fox symbolism in particular suggests a cosmic event originating from a specific position. The belt buckle eclipse and snake symbols are consistent with a cometary encounter. We also find evidence that a key function of Göbekli Tepe was to observe meteor showers and record cometary encounters. Indeed, the people of Göbekli Tepe appear to have had a special interest in the Taurid meteor stream, the same meteor stream that is proposed as responsible for the Younger Dryas event. Is Göbekli Tepe the smoking gun for the Younger Dryas cometary encounter and hence for coherent catastrophism? Was Göbekli Tepe an observatory? Dr. Sweatman's comment that Göbekli Tepe may have functioned as an observatory at some stage in its history is a controversial one. The claims of Göbekli Tepe's connection to the night sky have been mostly rejected by the main archaeological team excavating the temple. In their opinion, although Göbekli Tepe is extraordinarily well preserved, time and the elements have changed the location of certain features at the site. Some of the pillars at Göbekli Tepe were certainly removed and recycled elsewhere during occupation of the site. Moreover, later civilizations in the area, and more recently farmers, have repositioned parts of certain pillars, even on some occasions breaking pieces off. In a paper written in response to the claims of Dr. Sweatman and his team, they stated their main objection to his claim that Göbekli Tepe was an observatory is, "There is significant possibility that we're dealing with roofed structures. This fact alone would pose limitations to a function as sky observatories. The arches depicted on the western broadside of Pillar 43 could even be images of the monumental buildings themselves covered by a corbelled roof." Dr. Sweatman published a quick response to the criticism of their work by the excavators of Göbekli Tepe, and in this response they reiterated their hypothesis that Göbekli Tepe had been at an early stage at the site's history, an observatory, whether it was in later life a roof structure or not. They said, "We suggest construction of the rough stone enclosure walls might or might not have supported a roof, might have followed an earlier phase of construction consisting of relatively freestanding pillars. We suggest this because the carvings on many of the pillars are covered by these walls. Given the undoubted extreme effort required and limited resources available to construct the pillars and their carvings, it makes little sense to us that the buildings of Göbekli Tepe would have immediately hidden many of the carvings within the rough stone enclosure wall. We also note that, whether Göbekli Tepe was roofed at some point or not, this has little bearing on the statistics in our interpretation. It only affects interpretation of the usage of Göbekli Tepe at some point in its history. Most people are familiar with the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah. For most scholars, it is just a story. But one scientific study has determined that a clay tablet dating from around 700 BC is a copy of notes taken by an eyewitness to the ancient asteroid impact believed to be responsible for the destruction of the two biblical cities. The cuneiform symbols on the tablet, recently translated by researchers, are believed to detail an account written by an ancient Sumerian astronomer watching the asteroid impact. There are other competing theories for the destruction of the two cities, however. Recently, one researcher wrote that he was convinced that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by a massive earthquake followed by a catastrophic landslide. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah were two notoriously sinful cities in the biblical book of Genesis, located in the region of the Dead Sea, between what are now Israel and Jordan in the Middle East. Along with the cities of Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar, Sodom and Gomorrah constituted the 5 cities of the plain, referenced throughout both the Old and New Testaments and the Quran. Genesis describes God's dissatisfaction with Sodom and Gomorrah and his decision to destroy them. The sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he outthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But his wife, from behind him, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Now Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. Thus it came about, when God destroyed the cities of the valley, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out in the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. It is an extremely dramatic story, but is it merely fiction? According to archaeologists, scientists, and biblical scholars, there is no evidence that Sodom and its sister town Gomorrah even existed, let alone that they came to a sudden and disastrous end. The ancient clay tablet. In March 2008, it was announced in the media that an ancient clay tablet that had perplexed scientists for over 150 years had been identified as a witness's account of an asteroid that destroyed the biblical cities of Sodom and Gomorrah 5,000 years ago. The cuneiform tablet, known as the Planisphere, is in the British Museum collection number K8538 and was discovered by Henry Layard in the remains of the library in the royal place at Nivernais. The tablet was made by an Assyrian scribe around 700 BC. The recently translated cuneiform symbols are believed to be an ancient copy of the night notebook made by ancient Sumerian astronomer who watched the asteroid impact. Astonishingly, scholars have been able to pinpoint the date of the impact at dawn on the 29th of June, 3123 BC, based on the symbols on the tablet which describe cloud formation and the positions of constellations in the sky. The theory was put forward by Alan Bond, Managing Director of Reaction Engines Limited, and Mark Hemsel, Senior Lecturer in Astronautics at Bristol University in the UK, who spent 8 years researching the subject and collecting evidence to support their theory. The asteroid in question is believed to have been over half a mile wide and probably crashed into the Austrian Alps at Kofels, where there is evidence of a huge ancient landslide. It had long been thought that a large object had impacted at Kofels, the evidence being a giant landslide 640 feet thick and 3.1 miles in diameter. Hemsel describes the ancient event as he believes it happened. It came in at a very low angle, around 6 degrees, and then clipped a mountain called Gaskogel, around 11 kilometers from Kofels. This caused it to explode, and as it traveled down the valley, it became a fireball. When it hit Kofels, it created enormous pressure, which pulverized the rock and caused the landslide. But because it wasn't solid, there was no crater. Another conclusion can be made from the trajectory. The back plume from the explosion, the mushroom cloud, would be bent over the Mediterranean Sea, re-entering the atmosphere over the Levant, Sinai, and northern Egypt. The ground heating, though very short, would be enough to ignite any flammable material, including human hair and clothes. It's probable more people died under the plume than in the Alps due to the impact blast. According to Dr. Hemsel, around 386,000 square miles would have been devastated by the asteroid, and the impact would have been equivalent to more than 1,000 tons of TNT exploding. He believes that at least 20 ancient myths record devastation which could equate to that of the type and on the scale of the asteroid's impact. These stories include the Old Testament tale of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the ancient Greek myth Phaeton, son of Helios, who fell into the river Eridanus after losing control of his father's sun chariot. Bond and Hensel presented their theory in their 2008 monograph, A Sumerian Observation of the Kofels Impact. However, the academic world was far from convinced by the asteroid theory. John Taylor, a retired expert in Near Eastern archaeology at the British Museum, pointed out that there was no evidence that the ancient Sumerians had the ability to make such accurate astronomical records, and that our knowledge of Sumerian language was very far from complete. I remain unconvinced by these results, he stated. In December 2018, yet another theory accounting for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah emerged. This time, it was a meteor that exploded in the air near the Dead Sea 3,700 years ago and could have wiped out communities in the area of the Bronze Age city of Tel al-Hammam, which, according to one of its excavators, Stephen Collins, is the biblical city of Sodom from the Bible. Part of the abstract from the conference presentation by the two proponents of this new theory, archaeologists Philip J. Sylvia and Stephen Collins of Trinity Southwest University in Albuquerque, reads, "The paper surveys the multiple lines of evidence that collectively suggest a Tunguska-like cosmic airburst event that obliterated civilization, including the Middle Bronze Age city-state anchored by Tol el-Hammam in the Middle Gore, the 25-diameter circular plain immediately north of the Dead Sea, 3,700 years before present." The two researchers also have an intriguing explanation as to how Lot's wife could have been turned into a pillar of salt. They theorize that the intense shock waves from the blast may have also covered the area with a superheated brine of Dead Sea anhydride salts. This catastrophic event could also account for the archaeological evidence that indicates that it took almost 600 years for civilization to return to the area, as the soil had been rendered useless for agriculture. Did an earthquake destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? A conflicting theory for the destruction of the two biblical cities emerged a few years ago. Retired geologist Graham Harris believes that not only did Sodom and Gomorrah exist, but that they were also destroyed by a dreadful natural apocalypse corresponding in the description in the Book of Genesis. Harris spent 10 years researching in the area where the two biblical cities were supposed to be located and came to the conclusion that the conditions there were perfect for a massive earthquake that would have triggered a huge landslide. Harris believes the resulting destruction of settlements in the area would have been so devastating that it could have passed into folklore. A summary of Harris's 2015 book on the subject, Destruction of Sodom, the A Scientific Commentary, states, "In the Destruction of Sodom, the biblical account of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is examined under the spotlight of modern science against a cultural backdrop of history and archaeology. In this scientific reconstruction, the account of the events described in the Book of Genesis is verified, and it is established that the destruction occurred at about 2350 BC as a result of an earthquake-induced landslide transporting Sodom to the depths of the Dead Sea. Strands of geography, geology, and engineering science are drawn together to provide comprehensive treatment of all relevant scientific aspects pertinent to a rational understanding of the mechanics of the disaster." Graham Harris provides evidence that the mainstay of Canaanite commerce was the exploitation of the bitumen resources of the Dead Sea, that the Sodomites were among the world's first chemical engineers. The destruction of Sodom is an example of the application of science to a fuller understanding of one of the most intriguing events in the Old Testament, and will be of direct interest to scholars as well as to the wider public. All these competing theories, of course, can't be right, and thus far, none of them have proved convincing enough to be taken seriously by the academic world.